One of the greatest fears of a mother is that everybody's going on with life and you just hope that your daughter will not be forgotten.
It's burned right into your soul and into your heart and your mind.
I'm journalist Angela Kennecke. I lost my oldest child, Emily, to fentanyl poisoning in 2018. Emily was just 21. Her death was preceded by years of struggle, the struggle of addiction so many families face today. We were just 3 days away from holding an intervention when she died. We couldn't save her.
There's a term called amelioration of grief, and it means that grief takes time, and it will get better only if you put work into it.
In this podcast, I'm grieving out loud with other parents who've lost children and with those currently struggling with the monster of addiction.
I didn't want to go into withdrawal. It was like one of the biggest fears of my life at the time.
You were terrified of withdrawal?
Terrified.
Why?
It is the worst pain, illness, the worst feeling that I could ever imagine having.
I'm also learning from experts in the field on how we can and must do better to treat this disease of the brain.
We treat the addiction and the effect of the addiction, but we're not looking at the pain.
The root
cause.
Today I am joined by Carol Morris from Massachusetts. She is a mother of 12. Tragically, in the last 20 years, she has lost 5 children to overdose. It's unimaginable, but it's happened to her. And this mother joins me now to talk about how she has survived and why she's so passionate about talking to others and what she does, to spread the word about what happened in her family. Carol, thank you so much for being here today.
You're most welcome.
I think when people first hear this, I'm sure you get this all. You got it from me the first time we spoke on the phone. 5 children? How do you survive losing 5 children?
It's not easy, and it didn't happen like all at once. So it happened over time. And, as the crisis is getting worse and worse and worse, we are seeing more families that are losing more than one child. Or they'll have 2, I just talked to a mother the other day who lost one in August and then lost one in September.
I've interviewed a father who lost his 2 only sons. It's not unheard of. I think we talked on the phone earlier about statistically, if you have 12 children.
Yeah, and you have more children, so it's more likely that you will probably lose more. I mean, people often say, well, didn't the other one just stop after they lost, the first sibling? Well, like the last one that died was 32. The first one that died would have been 52 if he was still alive. So there was 20 years between them. They didn't really, they weren't like brother connected, like pals and whatnot. And I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think it's just got to do with I don't know, there's so many people that do it now that it's almost become like a recreational thing for them. My last son who just died, Doug, he was in the methadone clinic for 2 years. And when he came off, which I didn't want him to, I didn't think he was ready, but of course he was an adult and he made the decision to. I often asked him, I said, what are you getting out of this, getting high and overdosing? And he said, Mara, it's like a monster in your head. It just pulls you in and it makes you want to do it. So, okay, so me, like you, probably never experienced that because we don't do drugs. We don't know how they feel.
And I think also the East Coast, well, we definitely have a problem in the Midwest where I live with opioids. The epidemic is definitely nationwide.
It's everywhere.
It started on the East Coast, and I think it's more severe on the East Coast in states like Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont.
And there's no demographics. There's no like rich kids or poor kids or in between kids. It can be anyone. And it's that age group really from, I'm going to say from 20 to like 33, 34 that are the most affected. Though I've seen a lot of 18-year-olds that have now passed away. So it's really hard. But even here now, there's really no heroin. It's all fentanyl around here now.
It's all fentanyl. And what's the most common question that people ask you when they hear this number of losing 5 children to this epidemic? What do
Most
people
people
say?
don't know what to say to me. Most people just look at me and, ooh, I'm sorry. What else can they say to me? They don't know what to say to me. And I don't lie, like I've met mothers whose kids have died, and there are some mothers that are very much in denial, or they don't want to, they think it's the shame and the stigma, but it's not a shame or stigma. People need to understand that this is a disease, just like cancer is a disease. Alcoholism is a disease. When children have done drugs for a number of years, it alters their brain. And it takes a long time for it to change. And so what I observed in my kid is here, what they do is you go to detox for 5 days, and then they tell you go to the methadone clinic or go to the boxing clinic. Or if you or go to a sober, they try to get you into a halfway or sober house. And right now it's winter, so it's harder. That doesn't work. I think you have to have programs in place that detox them and keep them in until they're ready to re-enter society. And in my opinion, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, but I am a mother who's lost 5 kids. And I have seen the effects that it's taken on. And my kids have lost lots of friends. It isn't just my kids. I know a dozen kids that grew up with my kids that have died from the opioid. It's just like insane. The kids that hung in my house and played with my children have all died too.
Oh.
I think long-term treatments that equal like 2 years. So here in Massachusetts, we do have substance use disorder high schools for kids who have started experimenting with drugs. And I'm talking about the 15 and 16-year-olds, to help them to, when they finish school, be at the point where they are in recovery. And, it's a good idea. And my granddaughter was in that.
Yeah, you mentioned that your son described the monster of addiction to you, but also the tool that this monster is using is fentanyl. I think that in addition to better treatment, we need to figure out how to get fentanyl off the streets.
Oh, absolutely. I think that we need to have better policing, more arrest, and I think we need to hold countries like Mexico and China accountable for it. Just they would hold us accountable if it was the reverse. If it was us sending it to them, they would hold us accountable. Everyone's child is equally as important. I know you said in your daughter's case that those people were, convicted, which is a rarity.
I think so too. Yeah.
I'm still waiting for mine. The police, I live in a little town that had like 5,000 people. And the police officer is like, the only reason that they bothered to investigate was because the radio station had called them and said, we're doing an interview with her. Have you investigated? And really, and honestly, they don't want people to say, oh, what a crappy police station. But it is a crappy police station because they don't care. We knew who he was. I know where he lives. We had all the information in the cell phone, the whole text, everything.
And you're talking about your latest son, Doug, who died in 2019.
My other kids, my first son that died, he was found in the stairwell.
Joey?
Yeah, we don't know who. The next one to die was Timmy. So him and his friends were speedballing, which is heroin and cocaine together. He overdosed, and the 2 kids he was with just threw him in the other room in the bed and just left him there for 9 hours before they called 911. So rigor mortis had already set in. There was no hope for him. My daughter, Lauren.
And that was in 2007 that you lost Lauren?
Yes, in 2007. Timmy died in 2004. Lauren was in 2007. She just got out of a psychiatric hospital, but while she was in there, one of the patients introduced her to fentanyl patches.
Oh.
And I don't know, I visit my kids often in these detoxes and in psych hospitals, and you couldn't take your pocketbook in. You could only, leave your car keys at the desk. They wouldn't let you bring anything in your pocket. At this hospital, you could just like walk in, you could bring them in lunch, you could go in their room, you could close the door. How did a patient exchange with my daughter her meds for their fentanyl patches? She left the hospital on February 28th. They found her dead on the morning of March 2nd. February, 28 days. Stephen, it was heroin. He was in his girlfriend's hallway when they found him. The police in Cambridge, he was found in Cambridge, and he died in 14. The police knew who it was, and they asked his girlfriend to do a buy and set her up, but she refused. She refused because she was also an addict.
And then
So
Doug died in your house, huh?
Hell, Doug stood at the top of my stairs. I said, Doug, I think that you were high yesterday. And I knew that he was using because his brother had come and told me that he had asked to use his room to shoot up. Because we had a plumber in the house that day in the bathroom. Doug has a bathroom in his bedroom. So the plumber had to go in there. And I didn't want to say your brother told me. I didn't want him to get mad at his brother. And he said, no, Ma. He says, I'm not. I'm doing good. I love you. He gave me a kiss, gave me a hug. I walked downstairs. 10 minutes later, my daughter was running across the floor upstairs and she knocked over a chair, and that's what startled me.
Carol, the one thing I was wondering, how do you cope? I mean, how in the world do you get up every day, get dressed, you're talking to me? I mean, I feel like losing one child has ripped my heart open.
I get up the same way you get up every day. You have to get up. And it took me a very long time. And joining Not in Vain was very helpful for me. Before I joined Not in Vain, I also belonged to Team Sharon, which is also another support group. But I found Not in Vain much more supportive. You can always get on the Facebook page. You can always talk to someone if you want. I oftentimes private message people. If I see someone who has, seriously, I think they're at the point where they really need one-on-one, I'll message them. I leave my phone number openly for them to call me. I tell them message me or text me, whichever way makes you feel comfortable. Because I think sometimes it's hard for someone to just talk to a stranger. And the sad part is sometimes the person who's calling me is in South Carolina or Pennsylvania, but I'm in Massachusetts. It's not like I can hop in my car and let's go over and sit down and, have a cup of coffee and talk. So do I cope? I cry a lot. I'm sure you do. I have anxiety when I stopped going to malls because I would see someone that would be built like my child or walk like my child. So I no longer do that. I no longer do the things that make me think more of them. The other day I cooked noodles for dinner, which is the first time since my son Doug died. And of course he loved noodles. On Thanksgiving I made homemade stuffing, and he loved that. That was very hard to do. So all those things trigger a lot of anxiety and depression. And I don't mean to leave fathers out, because I know fathers hurt too. But I think a mother hurts a little more. I think we're a little closer to our child, mostly, I guess, because we gave birth to them. So my kid's biological dad died in 2003 from cancer. I am remarried. I had actually divorced him in 92, but he was still their father. He's still a good dad. And I'm remarried to a really wonderful man. He's a little older than me. I'm 70, so he's going to be 88 next week. So his kids never did those kind of things. His kids, are a different generation. His kids are a little younger than me. So he doesn't kind of understand it. Like, why did this happen?
Yeah, it's hard for anybody who hasn't coped with something like this to really understand it, I think.
I got mad at him one day and I said, you act like they don't exist. And that's the thing that really bothers me. Is people act like once our child dies, like we never were here. But they were here. It's almost Christmas time. Unfortunately, COVID, most people are not going to be getting together, which is probably a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. We need to hear that people do remember them. We need to have one mother on Facebook the other day showed some pictures of her daughter. She says one of her friends just sent her these bunch of pictures of her daughter that she's never seen. I thought that was a wonderful thing that she did for that mother.
Yeah. I think people are afraid, and in your case, if you lost 5 children, you're thinking about one of those 5 at all times, right? Or all of them at once. I think people are afraid to bring it up because they think you're doing okay. You look like you're doing okay, right? You're functioning. You're going through your day, and they're afraid to bring it up because they think it's going to make you sad. And what they don't understand is that it never leaves you.
No, but I think they think that they're going to remind us they died. We're not going to ever forget that. We're not going to forget that they died. We're not going to forget that we lost them. I'm not going to, all my other kids died away from the house. Doug died in the house, which was probably the most horrific experience I've ever had in my life. To see him laying on the floor, I keep knocking in the kitchen drawer. I keep it in my bedroom. I keep it in his room. I keep it in his sister's room. My daughter, by the time I got up the stairs, had given him Narcan. She was doing CPR, but she looked at me and said, "Mom, there's no heartbeat." The EMTs, and they were here. They were here in less than 5 minutes. And I mean, we made the phone call. They were here. They acted wonderful. We probably had 3 ambulances out there. We had everyone here that was, fighting for them. So we all deal with it differently. I deal with it. I cry a lot. I've actually come to terms with all the other kids being dead. It's took me a long time. Joey, Timmy, Lauren, Stephen, I've come to terms with their physical being not being here. But I haven't with Doug yet. And he's been dead a little over a year.
What did it take for you to come to terms with their physical being not being with you anymore?
A long time.
Time.
Took a long time.
Is time the only thing that helps?
No, well, I mean, as like we're going to be going into 2021, and as soon as we do, I'm sure every mother says, "Oh, it's another year. Here we go. They've been dead another year." They would have been 32 this year. My son Joey died at just before his birthday. He was 31. He would have been 52 on December 6th. So it's time, and we know in our heart that they're not coming back. As much as we want them to come back, I cry a lot. I have a lot of anxiety. Like I said, I don't go to malls anymore because if I see someone who walks like my son Tim or has a haircut like my son Steven, it bothers me. And I'm not unhappy. What I think that us mothers need is also, like, I had great support when they died, and I had their wake and their services. But afterwards, it's like they didn't exist. I put a thing on Facebook just before Thanksgiving, and I put it on public and in Not in Vain. And I asked everyone, I said, please share this. All us mothers really need right now during this, especially during Thanksgiving and Christmas. Listen, send them a text and say, you know what? I was Timmy's friend in 5th grade. And I remember, at the football game, how he, made the touchdown. Let us know that they were human and that they existed.
And they mattered. And they mattered.
If we could have saw it when they first started using drugs, there probably would have been different outcomes. But you don't get to see it when they first start. It takes
They hide it. They hide it, and months can go by. Yeah, even years sometimes.
And they hide it until they get to the point where they either get violent in the house and there's other little kids, and what happens, DCF steps in because the kid goes to school and says, "Oh, my brother just hit my mother or fought with them," or they start stealing from you, which is something my kids did to me, to a very large amount of money, not counting how much I've spent on them trying to save them. And honestly, Angela, I would do it 1,000,000 times over.
Sure.
I would anything to save my children. And right now, I have 3 recovering addicts.
Do you think that it's hereditary then? Is it genetic, do you think?
Their father drank. Their father was an alcoholic, so I had divorced them. I do kind of think that there's got to be something in the genes that makes them predisposed to it. All right. So I don't think alcohol is true. I think my kids, most of them, other than like Joey and the older kids, like Joey, Brandon, Jim, and Paula and Lauren, they never saw their father really drunk, because I left him when Sarah was like 3. Doug was 5. So they didn't really see that. But I think that, yeah, I do think that there's a little heredity in there. I do think there's a little daring from friends. I do think
peers, right? Peers are always a big factor.
Never blamed any of my kids' friends for the kids doing drugs or for dying. We can't obviously always choose our children's friends. We can say, I wish you wouldn't hang around with that person, because if we say to our children at 10 years old, I don't want you playing with that person, more than likely they're going to play with that person. Kids tend to be, I don't know, kind of want to be independent and pick their own friends.
Let's talk about the shame and blame placed on mothers.
Okay,
Because I think
I know it's absolutely, there's not one mother in the world that is at fault for that. I do know of one case where a mother was doing drugs with her daughter. And yeah, I did kind of blame that, but now I know that the mother is clean. I know this person. She's been in recovery for 3 years. And her daughter is in the methadone clinic. I was just horrified that a mother would sit around with her daughter and shoot up drugs. How do you do that?
I don't know. We know what happens, but I think for those of us that tried to help our children, tried to battle this monster of addiction, it's so painful then when someone just believes that it couldn't happen in their family, it couldn't happen to their kids. There must be something wrong with you, the mom. And they never say it really about the dad that I've heard anyway. It's always the mother. Yeah.
But no, I don't buy that. I mean, this is right now, most mothers work. Most people, in my day growing up, mom stayed home and she was June Cleaver, with the beads and skirt, come home and made the mail. They don't do that anymore. You can't afford to do that anymore. Who can afford to do that? Everybody works. That's why we have daycare. That's why, Nana babysits. I never put my kids in daycare. They went to Head Start when they were little, but if I had it when I left their dad and went to work, my older kids minded my younger kids. But I worked mostly during the time while they were in school, maybe an hour or two afterwards, And then in the summertime, I used to take my daughter to my youngest one. I used to take her to work with me and I put her in the daycare, where I worked. So no, it's not the mother's fault. It's not the dad's fault. I can't blame the friends. I think that because our children unwittingly get drugs that they really weren't looking for. Right now, the majority of the deaths are all fentanyl deaths. They're not accidental. That's, to me, is just outright murder.
I agree.
My son never did fentanyl. I know what he did. He did heroin.
And which can kill you. You can die from an overdose of heroin, but it takes such little amount of fentanyl, to kill somebody. And it's so deadly. I mean, I just think it's different than the heroin users of 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, it's so different.
So go back 20, 30 years, only rich people could afford heroin. It was very expensive 20 or 30 years ago. Now it's cheap. We just had an incident where 3 teenagers were smoking pot and they laced it with fentanyl. All 3 of them, while they were smoking the pot, dropped dead. 17-year-olds, 3 of them.
In Massachusetts, that happened? And I think that's the one thing. There's this big marijuana debate. I guess I would rather have the marijuana legal and, you got it from a dispensary where it wasn't laced with fentanyl. I mean,
marijuana is legal in our state. It has been for a couple of years. It's legal, but it's very pricey. So an ounce costs like $500.
Oh, so these kids got the marijuana illegally because it was cheaper.
Because they probably got a $20 bag from somebody. Whereas versus a $500 ounce from the dispensary, but they weren't old enough. But they're no longer here now. All 3 of them are dead. And these drug dealers don't care. They don't care, not one bit. I knew a kid that was a drug dealer. He went to jail. When a guy says, "Did that teach you anything?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "I make more money selling drugs than I can getting a job. And besides," he says, "now that I got a record, I can't even get a job. So what else am I going to do? I'm going to sell drugs." They don't care if they kill people. And what they say is, well, we didn't know it was fentanyl. Of course they did, because if you ever watch, they get the heroin, the big dealer, he cuts it with something. He sells it to the next person who cuts it till it gets down to the little guy who cuts it more. So for 1 or 2 reasons, either he is an addict and he keeps his portion to use, or he wants to make a little money off it.
It's such a devastating problem. I mean, it is just, and I feel like we just cannot get our arms around it. Like we just can't do enough. And it's just getting worse because during the pandemic, as we've seen from national statistics, that overdoses are up, overdose deaths are up. People are feeling more hopeless. People are relapsing. more than ever. The Facebook group, #NotInVain, was helpful to you. But it
Yeah.
sounds like what was helpful to you about that was your ability to help other mothers.
I guess because there was no one there to do it for me. So when I do it for them, it just makes me feel better. And I've actually made friends with a few of them that we talk on a regular basis now. And I think it's very helpful to know that you have somebody who understands what you're going through. And I've seen so many people like say, like, some of my kids won't talk to me anymore because they think I dwell about the child too much. My sister tells me I should get over it after 6 months. I mean, how do you tell someone that's not fair? How do you tell someone? So yeah, it does help me.
I'm so glad that you have that community, because you're right. 20 years ago, there probably wasn't a lot of understanding or even talk about this. There was a lot of shame surrounding it when this started for you and your family.
Yep.
I'm so grateful that you are willing to speak on this podcast, and I am so sorry about the loss of your children. No one should have to go through that kind of thing. Nobody.
And you know what? It's going to keep going on until we stand up and do something. Until we get, and I think it has a lot to do with the government. And I mean, we allocate money to go into space, billions of dollars, send in a spaceship. What was it that they sent up one day? A rocket ship that cost like $38 million. You can imagine we could have opened up some resources for recovery houses, for better clinics. Yeah.
I wondered if we could maybe end this podcast with you talking a little bit about each one of the children that you lost. Would you share a little bit about Joey and
Okay.
Timothy and Lauren and Stephen and Doug?
So Joey was my first child. Okay. He was a very gifted guitarist. He had his own little sound studio. He didn't have any children. He probably started doing drugs when he was about 16, although I didn't know. But as soon as he turned 18, he went out on his own. He, like, very independent. And then he just started, like, staying away, not talking. And way back then, they didn't even have cell phones. So you had to hope that he called the house. He was 31 when he passed away. I don't know if he ever overdosed before that. So from 16 to 32 apparently. And he was a master chef on the Spirit of Boston, which was a cruise ship. So I mean, he always worked. So he had his money to buy his drugs. He never had to borrow money. And his death was just like a shocker to me. So he died in 2000, and their dad died in 2003. And that was after a 13-year battle with cancer. So that was not an easy, journey either. And then Timmy, which it was a shock. When the police knocked at my door, the police officer said, are you the famous words are you the parent of? And as soon as you hear that word, you have to know what's coming next. He said, Timmy, he said, well, call the Watertown police station. So I called the police station, and the detective says to me, is that police officer still there? I said, no. I hear him get on the phone and scream at the other police department, tell him to get back there. So I already knew they were going to tell me something bad. And then he told me, and then when I found out, he was with two friends. They were in the friend's house. The grandparents were in the other room. Tim overdosed. They just threw him in the other room, just left them, continued partying for the night. In the morning, rigor mortis had set in. They went to wake him up and couldn't wake him up. He was a carpenter. I was shocked. I never even knew he ever did drugs. And, his friends told me after. It's a very sad thing at Tim's wake. I'm standing at the head of his coffin, and his friends, the friends that grew up with him, are standing behind me, and they all turned around and said, when this gets over, we will all go get fucked up for Tim. I was like shocked that they said that. I turned around, guys, do you think this is his birthday party? Take a good look. It's the last time you're ever going to see him. So then we go on to Lauren. She had a lot of psych issues. She did have a son. He's 18 now. He has a very good relationship with us, him and his dad. They're here with us every holiday. He comes up at least once a month. He has got autism, but he's on the very low scale. So she's the only one that had a kid. But like I said, she went in the hospital. The girl gave her the fentanyl patches. She left the hospital with 2 patches on. And this was the coroner that told me this. He says, I can't believe why she had 2 patches on. There's no prescriptions for her. And we found out it was someone in the hospital that had given it to her. And then we go on to Stephen. Stephen struggled with addiction. I had Stephen move in with us. We were taking him every day to the methadone clinic. My husband got him a job at one of the car dealerships, and he just wasn't ready to stop. And that's another one of the big problems. Not every addict is ready to stop.
What about Doug?
And he bought a $40 bag of dope and nuts for children. And it was a bag of pure fentanyl. There was no heroin in it. That kid sold him pure fentanyl. So he I walked downstairs, he walked in his room. They must have come out to the kitchen to get a bottle of water and dropped dead right on the kitchen floor. So,
Well, Carol, I'm horrified by what you've had to go through. I know how painful it is to lose one child. I cannot imagine losing 5. Are there any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
that there's always someone there for the mothers who often get blamed for it. If they don't belong to Not in Vain, they should join. There's always someone there. That we do need each other as support things, especially through things like holidays and birthdays and anniversaries. And what is going to happen to this world? We're losing this whole generation of children. These are the children who are supposed to grow up and be, like our doctors, our lawyers, our parents, and what's going to happen? And so many are leaving children behind.
Well, I just want to wrap this up, Carol, by saying we've made it through Thanksgiving, and
So far.
yeah, and I wish you the best as we survive
too,
this
Angela.
Christmas. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. For resources for families and how to get help, just go to Emily's Hope at paintingapathtorecovery.org. If you found this podcast helpful, please consider giving us a positive review. Thank you.